Good evening from Washington. I'm Michael Steele in for Chris Hayes. There's a lot to get to tonight, including some really big developments in the many criminal investigations into Donald Trump. But I need to start with a question for today's Republican Party. What the hell's wrong with you? Today, House MAGA Republicans took an official party leadership sanctioned field trip to visit the January 6th insurrectionists, who they call political prisoners.
This is just one step in, just exposing what's going on, making sure that we have the right information, and really listening to our constituents. We hear about the D.C. jail regularly when we go back home, and the American people are very concerned about some of the folks who are here. So we're listening to them, and we're here on their behalf.
Congresswoman Boebert, I hate to break it to you, but you don't have the right information if you think the American people want you to waste your energy on the violent insurrectionist mob. In fact, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, you know her, the ringleader of today's circus, heard that message loud and clear from one protester who obviously wasn't a fan of her stunt.
We have to work as hard as possible to defund the two-tiered injustice system, and we have to return freedom and due process rights to these pre-trial January 6th defendants. And as you can see, there's paid protesters here today, and they can whistle and say everything they want, but we will not be deterred. We do not care about them because they work for evil.
I'm getting me a whistle. I'm getting me a whistle. I'll talk to one of the Democrats who joined along on that trip in just a moment to hear why he called his Republican colleagues' conduct today, quote, shameful. But this whole sad pandering show of support for the insurrectionists comes from the top of the Republican Party. Just look at what House Speaker Kevin McCarthy was doing yesterday. He met with the mother of Ashley Babbitt, the insurrectionist who sadly lost her life while she was doing Donald Trump's warped bidding on January 6th.
Mr. Speaker, why are you having a meeting today with Ashley Babbitt's mother? Can you talk to us about that?
She requested a meeting.
And what do you plan to talk to her about?
She requested a meeting.
But that McCarthy is one smooth operator. Oh, yes, because while Trump was distracted by the little stunt with the insurrectionist and placated by McCarthy's meeting with Babbitt's mother, the speaker used a little sleight of hand to deliver a huge gift to Trump's chief 2024 rival, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Now, you see, I know a thing or two about Republican politics and how it works. And I know for a fact that some of the party's big donors, at least the ones who aren't fully Trumpified, are trying their best to help Ron DeSantis by elevating his legislative agenda into the unofficial party platform. And just today, while everyone was distracted by the MAGA circus at the D.C. jail, guess what Kevin was doing? He pushed through a national version of DeSantis' signature so-called parental rights bill right into the House.
You know, the Republicans put out our commitment to America. And in our commitment to America, we said we were going to have a Parents' Bill of Rights. This is exactly what we just passed on the floor today. We're keeping our commitment. It's just another check off on all what we said we would do. This is not about Washington. This is empowering the parents. This is the Parents' Bill of Rights.
And Democrats wasted no time pointing out how draconian they think the McCarthy-DeSantis bill really is.
Today, extreme MAGA Republicans passed a bill that puts politics over parents and will ban books, censor librarians, and bully children. It's shameful. The extreme MAGA Republicans want to jam their right-wing ideology down the throats of students, teachers, and parents throughout America.
Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez may have put it best when she pointed out a specific book that was removed from Florida libraries under Ron DeSantis.
I think what we're seeing here today is the Republican Party's attempt to take some of the most heinous legislation that we are seeing passed on the state level to attack our trans and LGBT, as well as people from marginalized communities, right to exist in schools. Let's just look at the impacts of similar Republican legislation that has already passed on the state level. Look at these books that have already been banned due to Republican measures. The Life of Rosa Parks. This apparently is too woke by the Republican Party.
Really, Ron? You don't want kids to learn about Rosa Parks, the civil rights icon, an American hero? Well, who do you and Republicans like you think little kids should be reading about instead?
Everyone knows my husband, Ron DeSantis, is endorsed by President Trump, but he's also an amazing dad. Ron loves playing with the kids.
Build the wall.
He reads stories.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part.
He's teaching Madison to talk.
Make America great again.
And there it is, the modern Republican Party in a nutshell, reading MAGA BS to your kids while taking Rosa Parks out of our schools and libraries. That's the future Ron DeSantis wants for your kids, my kids, and our country. And apparently, Republicans in the House are more than happy to help him. Mona Charen is the policy editor for The Bulwark. Rick Tyler is a Republican political strategist, and both join me now. Mona, I don't even know where to begin with the Rosa Parks piece. What are we seeing happen here when you contextualize Republicans sort of elevating up this strategy that we see playing out in Florida, where they're bifurcating, dissecting, and pushing out things that they don't like?
So there was a school textbook where they just eliminated Rosa Parks' race from the entire story. They said that
she's now not a black woman. She's not a black.
She's just some woman who was forced to give up her seat.
Just a woman on a bus.
So that's obviously outrageous. The Democrats have a risk, it seems to me, of seeming to fall into a trap that Republicans are setting. And the Republican trap is, we want to empower parents. And this bill, this federal bill, which will not go anywhere because it's not going to pass the Senate, but it basically says parents should know what's being taught. It does not say ban, okay? It just says parents should be told what's going on in their kids' schools. They should have access to the curriculum. I think it would be a mistake and an overreach for Democrats to say this is fascism, this is book banning. I read the bill this afternoon. I didn't see any of that. So I think it may be a little bit overreaction. The Rosa Parks thing is what they should be after, or even better, why don't they focus on the fact that only 35% of fourth graders in American schools are competent at reading at grade level or can do math at grade level? That's the kind of thing that neither party seems concerned about. They're desperate to fight the culture wars, but the schools are not doing the basic work of teaching kids to read and figure.
I get and agree with your slippery slope analysis of where the trap sets for Democrats on this, but you know how you can kind of deal with that trap? Show up at the PTA meetings.
Agreed.
Teachers tell you every semester what they're teaching, and go to the PTA meetings and the school board meetings. You don't need to have that play out legislatively.
No, that's absolutely true. And by the way, some of the crazy Republicans in the House, who I would never think I would agree with on anything, voted, like Matt Gaetz, who's a lunatic.
Right.
He voted against this bill, but actually for a good reason. He said the federal government really shouldn't be involved in this.
Yeah, Republicans
which is true.
He was
stop clock is right twice a day.
So, Rick, let's pick up on that point. What do you make of today's Republicans and in this field trip that they took, sort of elevating these individuals who are in jail for, arguably committing a crime, now sort of paying them off as patriots and honorable individuals?
Okay, let me start out, Michael, by saying I don't do binaries. So, like, it's neither all one thing or all
or the other.
It's neither all one thing or it's all the other. I think the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene is representing the Republican Party and visiting insurrectionists in jail is really a bad message for the Republican Party. On the other side, I think that Governor DeSantis picked up on the fact that parents finally got fed up. Terry McAuliffe lost a race because of his utterance in a debate, and it turns out Democrats don't agree with the fact that parents shouldn't be deciding what teachers should teach in school. Parents should be involved in that. And I think it's a good thing because parents are getting involved. In fact, parents are now running for school board all across the country and throwing out a lot of school board members. The next step, of course, is they have to throw out the superintendent of schools. That's where they haven't fixed that part yet because it's very hard to find superintendents because the unions control them.
How do we reconcile on that? Just stay with that point for a moment. How do we then reconcile, if that's the narrative, that's the play, how do we reconcile you as a dad say, hey, I want my kid to learn about Rosa Parks, and me as a dad go, nah, we don't need that book in the school. Or we can look at a statue of David in high school or eighth grade, Michelangelo's David, and you say that's pornographic, and I say it's not. So now we've got all the parents in the room telling us how we want you to educate our kids. Teacher, what do we do?
There'll be school board elections. That's how it's done.
There are always choices. You're never going to get me to defend taking Rosa Parks out of school, right? But look, every curriculum has choices. Libraries have choices. I don't like the word banned. These books aren't banned. They're all available on Amazon. You can go get them yourself. Apparently,
but they're banned in the classroom.
No, they're not banned. They're not banned. People say we can't put every book in the Library of Congress in a public school. You have to decide at some point what goes in and what goes out. And it turns out the people in charge decide. And so if the people who are electing the school board members, who are appointing the superintendent, decide that these are the books that go in school, then those are the books that go in school. The amazing thing, Michael, that you remember is the Republicans lost on education as an issue for decades and decades and decades and decades. We won a governor's race on one issue in Virginia, education. And that is pretty scary to Democrats.
The sidebar is also sort of leveling up the CRT narrative, which was absolute BS because sixth graders weren't being taught CRT.
I don't do binaries.
Right.
And so you can find.
You can find it.
So Mona, find everything on all sides.
So Mona, let's just bring it out a little bit. As I talked about coming into this, the idea using this as a tool to elevate up DeSantism. All right. What are your thoughts there? Is this something that the donors think they're being, sort of sneaky peeky with this, or what?
Don't you have a little PTSD here?
A little bit.
It's like 2016 where the establishment people are saying, well, we can't have Trump, so we're going to get behind Jeb Bush or Scott Walker or somebody. And I'm afraid that because there are so many establishment types who are saying that DeSantis is our only hope to save us from Trump, that Trump is going to be able to use that effectively against DeSantis and say, you are the establishment figure, I'm the insurgent again, even though he was president of the United States, he's the head of the party, and so on. It's worrying.
It is. So, Rick, how does DeSantis, to Mona's point, sort of jockey and position himself to actually avoid that tag, that label, and sort of pull and strengthen that elevation that he's getting from donors and others in the party?
DeSantis is the only potential nominee on the Republican side who actually has a poll that beats Biden. Trump doesn't have that. Nobody else has that. That's what he has to focus on. That's what he has to find as important, is that if you want someone who can beat Biden, which is, of course, important to the Republican Party, then I can beat Biden. I have a poll to show it. Now, he'll have to consistently perform in those polls, but currently he's losing to Trump in a primary, but he's winning against Biden in a general. And so he's got to focus on, if you want to beat Biden, I'm the guy.
All right, so we got to get you guys back to continue this conversation and look at some of these books that are out there that are getting not banned.
I'll show you some of the banned books. You wouldn't like them, Michael.
Right. Rick Tyler and Mona Charen, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Coming up, as Marjorie Taylor Greene's party tries to turn Trump's mob into martyrs, one of the Democrats who joined the Republicans on their field trip to jail today joins me next.
Hey everyone, I'm Tom Llamas from Top Story on NBC News Now. Every night, Top Story is your news playlist. We take you to the front lines of the story where it's actually happening with NBC News journalists on the ground from all over the world. We cover what you need to know and bring your newsfeed to life. And now, Top Story is available as a podcast, so you can listen anytime and anywhere. Subscribe now for new episodes every weeknight.
The culture is diverse. The culture is strong and resilient. The culture is AAPI Women. Join MSNBC's Katie Phang as she hosts a dinner party with groundbreaking Asian American and Pacific Islander women who are shaping American culture. Featuring political strategist Huma Abedin, award-winning novelist Min-Jin Lee, and an interview with comedian and actress Margaret Cho. The culture is AAPI Women. Sunday, April 2nd at 10 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC and streaming on Peacock.
Now, for 2 years, we've heard the story from the people on the January 6th committee. We've heard the story about how it was an insurrection, and I'm going to tell you something right now. It was not an insurrection. What we have to do is we have to work as hard as possible to defund the two-tiered injustice system, and we have to return freedom and due process rights to these pre-trial January 6th defendants.
Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has repeatedly portrayed the people accused of storming the Capitol on January 6th as political prisoners whose human rights are being violated. So today, 2 Democrats went along on her congressional field trip to see what's really going on inside that D.C. jail. One of those Democrats is Congressman Robert Garcia of California. Ahead of the trip, he wrote on Twitter that he was going, quote, on behalf of our House Oversight Committee and ranking member, Jamie Raskin, adding they, quote, won't let Marjorie Taylor Greene and the MAGA extremists tell lies about the insurrectionists and their attack on our democracy. Congressman Garcia joins me now. Welcome, Congressman. Good to see you. So what did you see? What did you hear? What were those conditions like for those prisoners?
I mean, first, I think the truth is that Marjorie Taylor Greene is completely lying about the trip. Obviously, they had an intention of making it a circus. This is a very serious issue. At the end of the day, these are insurrectionists. These are people that attacked our Capitol, that try to overturn an election, that cause real harm to people. I mean, there are police officers, dozens and dozens that have been seriously injured. We lost a life. And so this idea that this was not an insurrection is a complete lie and fabrication. So we were there today on behalf of the Oversight Committee. What we saw was conditions that were fair. They have an open area to congregate. They're able to be outside their cells most of the time. We saw 20 insurrectionists there that have access to tablets and laptops and communication with their families. And so this idea that they're somehow being persecuted or in somehow terrible conditions is just not true. And so at the end of the day, what's really shameful is that when these insurrectionists were brought to us, when we were in the same area with them, the Republicans rushed to them and treated them like celebrities. So it's really shameful what they're doing, and they're continuing to tell lies.
You earlier today tweeted the actions of our Republican colleagues inside the facility and their lies about the visit are shameful, as you just noted. Can you tell us a little about those actions? What were they saying? What were they doing to really embarrass themselves, if you will?
Right. I mean, we saw the whole D.C. jail, different parts of the jail. They were set up in the area of the jail that was the newest, that was the most open. The leaders in the jail provided us with great information. I talked to the chief medical officer. These January 6 insurrectionists, the inmates, they have access to medical care 24 hours a day. They're well taken care of. When we were brought into the section that housed the 20 folks, and 17 of the 20, by the way, attacked Capitol police officers. They attacked law enforcement. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, they all rushed these folks. They patted them on the back. It was like they were greeting heroes. So it was honestly really disgusting to see the way they treated people that tried to overturn our democracy, and then to go outside, host a press conference, and say that no insurrection actually happened and that these folks are in some sort of two-tier justice system is just completely false. I have been to other jails. I know how oftentimes the jail system treats Black and brown folks, especially in very difficult conditions. That was not the case today. And so they should really be ashamed of themselves.
Congressman, did they offer, just picking up on what you were just saying about how they were treating these individuals in the jail, did they offer these insurrectionists any comfort beyond the political platitudes? But, we're here to help you. We want to put you in touch with this person or that person. How did they fashion that conversation that they were having directly with those insurrectionists?
Well, I mean, it was stunning. I mean, we were probably in the same room with these insurrectionists for probably about 30 minutes. It was an open area. I mean, there was interaction. This wasn't behind bars. We were all in the same space. And of course, the Republicans that were there were engaging with them. They were writing notes. They were telling stories. They were patting them on the back. And so it was really hard to see. And I mean, these are people that try to overthrow our government. And you have members of Congress that are there to uphold our Constitution and protect our country, treating them like heroes and essentially celebrities. And so it was very clear to us, me and my colleague who were both there on the Democratic side, that this was a circus, meant to get headlines, to have another press conference. And what I will say is the staff there, the medical team, the nurses that we met, they're doing everything they can to provide a sense of justice and decorum for all. They want to ensure that there's a process, and they are being treated fairly. And so this idea that they're not is just incorrect.
Congressman, before I let you go, we got a little less than a minute left. I want to ask you, what were your interactions with these prisoners? How did you approach them, speak with them, and give us a sense of how that went?
Well, when we were there, some of them did come up to myself and to Representative Crockett, the other Democrat. They tried to talk to us, tell us some stories, and a lot of it, quite frankly, was hard to listen to. I mean, they were spouting conspiracy theories, talking about Donald Trump, saying all sorts of crazy things. For me, it was about observing, making sure that we were getting all the information from the staff there, the medical team, while ensuring that the Republicans wouldn't tell lies, and we're able now to be very blunt and say that they were. And at the end of the day, the Republicans were there to create another press opportunity for themselves. And Marjorie Taylor Greene was surrounded by the January 6th inmates telling stories, acting like she was their main advocate. And so that was difficult to see, but I'm glad that we were there. I'm glad that our committee asked us to be there so we can push back on the lies that they're telling every single day.
Congressman Robert Garcia, thank you for your inside perspective of that visit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still ahead, after Donald Trump warns of violence, the Manhattan District Attorney receives a frightening threat. The power behind Trump's dangerous words next.
The former president said there would be a potential for, quote, death and destruction should Alvin Bragg choose to charge him in his investigation. What's your response to that?
Well, the twice impeached former president's rhetoric is reckless, reprehensible, and irresponsible. It's dangerous, and if he keeps it up, he's going to get someone killed.
Within hours after House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York said that about Donald Trump's warning of, quote, death and destruction if he's indicted by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, news emerged that Bragg received a written death threat with white powder. And the powder was determined to be non-hazardous, but the letter said, in all caps, quote, Alvin, I'm going to kill you. According to NBC News, it was one of several hundred threats against the district attorney and others in recent weeks. And researchers who monitor the online spaces where far-right groups organize say that while efforts to coordinate a large protest have largely fallen flat so far, users are still calling for the assassination or capture of Democratic political figures. Ben Collins, who covers extremism and the far right, has been reporting this out for NBC News, and he joins me now. Ben, good to see you. You spent the last week talking to researchers on extremism who told you about those threats to Bragg, and then now we learn of this death threat. What does that say to us about the convergence of online and real-life threats right now?
Yeah, Michael, it's the same people in the same places that were urging before January 6th. An insurrection, basically. The Donald, which is a big pro-Trump forum that was pushing people to go to the Capitol, posting pictures of their weapons that they had stored up at their hotels, things like that. And now some of those people are calling for Alvin Bragg to be killed, for his office to be blown up. That's one post. Another person said that someone should be put through a wood chipper. That's what's happening on Truth Social and the Dollar right now when you look at threats both towards Alvin Bragg, but also to other figures like Tish James as well. Really, anybody who is in the legal path of Donald Trump is getting death threats from these forums right now, and apparently now as well, packages with white powder in them at their office.
To that point, what types of threats do you think, Ben, that researchers and law enforcement in particular are most concerned about as Trump, is on the precipice of possibly facing indictment?
The big threat is lone wolf terror. We've seen a lot of that over the last few years tied to the MAGA movement. There was the MAGA bomber that, Cesar Sayoc, who attempted to send a bunch of mail bombs that didn't work before the 2018 midterms. In August of last year, Ricky Schiffer, who posted to Truth Social after he fired into an FBI field office after Donald Trump told people, got people riled up after he had Mar-a-Lago searched. This is how it works now. People are afraid to organize in public for Donald Trump, but all you need is one crazy person. That's the big worry with this. Crazy people do crazy stuff. They send mail bombs. They go and they fire into offices and things like that. It only takes one of them.
I want to pick up on the point you just made about the failure to organize in public. Why haven't we seen the large protests Trump called for this weekend, for example, his supporters to come out and rally? And there's some political reasons you could probably come up with. But I think more in your space that you're covering and writing about, what do you think is preventing them from actually organizing these large rallies? Is it something that's now just keeping low key and dissipating, like you said, to lone wolves, or what do you sense going on there?
Well, there's two main reasons. One, there's this cognitive dissonance there, where even though Trump said himself, "Go out and protest for me," everyone takes this idea as a trap by the feds. They say that if you show up and you protest for Donald Trump, they're going to take your email address. They're going to take, if you sign up for something, if you show up in that place, they're going to track your phone. All of these things. That's what they think. That even if Donald Trump is saying protest, that any protest would be taken over by the feds. So all of them say don't show up. And then there is this other, longstanding theory in these spaces that cities are on fire. So if you were to go to New York City, you were to wear a Trump hat, you'd be in imminent danger. And, that Antifa is still burning things to the ground or things like that. Not true, but that's what they think. So, maybe in a more Trump-centric place, in a couple of days, he's about to go to Waco. And he's about to have a rally there. So we'll see if that turnout is as enormous as he's hoping. But right now, the protests themselves have not really come together.
And that's interesting because I'm curious about the impact, not just in terms of rally participation, but the impact, this escalating rhetoric that we've seen from Trump and online, how that begins to shape people's behavior. What are your thoughts there? We have about a minute left.
Yeah, Michael, I think it's really interesting. And, we've talked about this in the past together in person about how, there's always been this wing of the Republican Party that is extremely upset about things like Ruby Ridge from, 30 years ago in Waco, from, the idea of FBI overreach. But the party didn't lean into it until very recently. And he is going to try to equate Ruby Ridge with January 6th when they're two very different concepts, very different ideas. He understands that there is this, burgeoning view about the FBI that he started, that it must be taken out. And he's going to find out if it's a big part of the party or not. We just don't know right now.
Ben Collins, one of the best at covering this story. Thank you so much, Ben. Appreciate you. Still to come, as Republican leaders threaten law enforcement and praise felons, how are voters reacting to this political strategy? That's next.
Hi, I'm Jordan Rubin, former prosecutor and legal writer with MSNBC. These days, it seems every news story has a major legal angle to it, whether it's the multiple investigations into Donald Trump, decisions from the Supreme Court that impact our lives, or fallout from the January 6th committee's findings. That's why we've launched Deadline Legal Blog, an online extension of Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace, where I'll be breaking down the legal implications of the stories that are driving the news cycle. Read the latest at msnbc.com/deadlineblog.
CNBC's Last Call podcast. Get the stories behind the numbers.
There's investing news that impacts your money in your portfolio.
And the people behind the business.
And there's business news that impacts your life.
From Wall Street to K Street and Main Street. The markets may close. Your money never stops.
Last Call is really about spotting tomorrow's opportunities tonight.
Brian Sullivan hosts Last Call. Follow and listen to CNBC's Last Call on your favorite podcast platform today.
In politics, it's easy to take the higher moral ground when the leader of the party that you're up against, Donald Trump in this instance, is threatening mob violence and sending his political goons into prisons to provide aid and comfort to the January 6th insurrectionists. But moral high ground aside, how is Donald Trump's political message actually playing out across America? And how will it continue to play as the presidential race heats up? Well, I got the guy who's going to help us unpack that. Joining me is Cornell Belcher, Democratic strategist and pollster, coming out in his casual grays tonight.
It's my drinking gray. It's Friday.
Dude. Let me tell you about Fridays and that. But here's the deal. How do you see this ratcheting up of rhetoric by Trump, the visit by Marjorie Taylor Greene embracing the insurrectionists, and now we have the actual physical letters threatening the life of the DA and his family? Is this bad for Republicans?
Well, look, I mean, you were once a brand keeper of the brand here, but look, for the last...
Yeah, but I never threatened anybody like that.
Right, well,
it wasn't not my play.
It was a different brand. And by the way, that's part of the problem. If you look at the last 3 weeks of news, it's hard for anyone just to be a student of politics to say, this has been a good 3-4 weeks of news for Republicans. What do you have? You have Donald Trump threatening law enforcement, threatening to bring another insurgency upon our country. You have Donald Trump making absolutely over-the-top racist statements, talking about the DA being an animal of Soros, right? You got both racism and anti-Semitism there. It's like a double. And you have Marjorie Taylor Greene parading to see the insurrectionists. If this is the picture of the Republican Party, I got to think not only is it problematic for Donald Trump in the general election, by the way, because I think he will be the nominee, but there's no way you take back the House. There's no way you hold on to the House. And they're looking at a Senate map that I think most of us argue is a tougher Senate map coming in for
Democrats.
Democrats. Absolutely. They're gonna do what they did last time around when we thought the Senate was gone as well. They're gonna make Democrats are gonna hold the Senate, if not pick up seats, because the Republican Party's brand is so far outside the mainstream.
But Cornell, okay, I hear the brand story, and I agree with you on paper, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
On paper, yeah.
Donald Trump picked up 7 million more votes 4 years after his onslaught of against the government, right?
Yeah.
He picks up 7 million more votes. He's still holding at least 35 to 40% of the Republican base. And that base actually has tentacles outside of the party, by the way, because a lot of Democrats walk around thinking that this is all just Republicans. It's not. It's America, right? Yeah. So what happens here? How does all of these narratives that you think on paper would dispositively take Trump out of play? I mean, he talked about he put kids in cages. He was talking about all kinds of stuff during 4 years, and he picked up 7 million more voters.
But also, Biden won by 7 or 8 million more votes as well, right? So you do have that surge, but he's running out of people, and that's part of the problem. I would argue that the last presidential race he absolutely surged his vote, but 51% of Americans surged the opposite direction. And it's hard to see how they make up ground with that majority of the voters doubling down on the same politics.
So let's layer on top of that conversation I just had a little earlier with our buddy Rick Tyler, and we were talking about the education space and how the narrative that DeSantis is lifting up out of Florida and now pushing out nationally about, giving parents parental control over the education of their kids. How do Democrats lean into that conversation to frame that? Okay, yeah, we want you. I mean, it's all about control, but Are there limits? What does that look like?
It's what's hiding underneath it, and what's hiding underneath it is the culture wars, right? Where Santos is, where Florida is, where woke goes to dime, et cetera. CRT, what have you. This is the culture wars is what was underneath it. Now, my friend, if you'd argue that Democrats have not done a very good job of engaging the Republicans in the cultural wars, I would
argue that.
I would agree with you.
I would argue that.
But there's a piece of this about Democrats staying above the fray. Look at what the president's been doing the last 2 weeks. He has not engaged in the conversation at all.
Right.
He's been out across America talking about his legislation, talking about what he's doing to get Americans back to work, talking about building infrastructure. There's a conversation that says he's the adult in the room, he's above the fray, and right now I think that's working for him.
All right. Adult's going to bring that ruler and smack some hands. My man, Cornell Belcher, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. Coming up, as the country waits on a potential New York indictment of Donald Trump, new reporting that Trump's old chief of staff will have to testify in a different investigation. Well, guess what? We're going to talk about it next. This week has been all about watching the various possible indictments of Donald Trump. And here's where things stand. The grand jury that is tasked with weighing whether or not to criminally charge Trump over hush money payments he made to porn star Stormy Daniels will meet again on Monday. Now, it's unclear what, if anything, will come of that. But add to that the Fulton County District Attorney's criminal investigation into potential efforts by Trump and his allies to interfere in the 2020 election in Georgia. And then there's Trump's attorney, Evan Corcoran, who appeared in court today for several hours after he was ordered to testify before a grand jury related to Trump's mishandling of classified documents. And today, a federal judge rejected Trump's claims of executive privilege and ordered his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, along with other top aides, to testify in special counsel Jack Smith's probe into the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill. Well, need a lawyer. We need two lawyers. Maya Wiley is a renowned civil rights attorney. Cynthia Alksne is a former federal prosecutor and expert on grand jury investigations. Both are in the House tonight. So, Maya, I want to start with you. We've seen today Alvin Bragg, the DA in New York, received death threats, largely provoked apparently by Donald Trump's use of hot rhetoric out there. Does this potentially put him using that Truth Social platform into some legal trouble, or is any of this action possibly admissible as an example of the kind of behavior that they're already got to have him in trouble for?
You know, this is such a common question and an important one, and it's very complicated because, as you know, there is a First Amendment right to free speech.
Yes.
And you have to cross a line there on inciting violence and then the violence to actually happen, and then to be able to link your what you said to that incitement. So in this case, that would be a separate criminal charge if you could get there. Right. From what Alvin Bragg and that grand jury are currently looking into. But I think the point here is, and the primary most important point, is this is behavior by Donald Trump that we have watched escalate on Truth Social, including his active efforts to tap, repeat, organized hate groups, organized extremist conspiracy theories on his media platform, which is it goes exactly to what we saw on January 6th. So one way or the other, he is proving over and over and over again to the American public that not only is this who he is not going to stop if he sees it in his personal interests, even if it's dangerous to life and limb for other people.
Interesting. So Cynthia, as we look ahead to Monday, you know, what do you think Bragg's office is likely doing between now and then to sort of get prepared for this grand jury vote?
Well, they have to make a decision on whether or not they're going to actually, expand the charges and look at some kind of menacing or harassment. So that's one thing they have to do. And there's a lot about that we don't know about what they've received. The second thing is it's not really that hard to get the indictment. I mean, if the evidence is all in and they've made that decision, you really write up potential charges, read them to the grand jury. Sometimes they want a little summary of what the evidence is, like, remember, we heard so-and-so said X or so-and-so said Y, and it's pretty quick. The grand jury system is so unknown and it's to people, but it's really more like a school board meeting. I mean, there's 24 people in there and 23 people in there, and you just go in and talk to them. They're in low tables like it's in a PTA meeting almost, and have a conversation with them. And it doesn't take very long for them to look at the charges and then sit around and make a decision.
So Maya, I want to turn quickly to Jack Smith's investigation, the January 6th committee. How big a deal is it that now you see the president's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, being pulled in to answer for some questions?
It's a big deal because what it says is that they're getting closer and closer and closer to wrapping this. And here's why. Mark Meadows is the guy who was in the room. In the room with Donald Trump in so many conversations. We know that from the public hearings we've heard from witnesses from the January 6th committee. But what prosecutors typically do is they move up the food chain of evidence, and up that food chain is usually up the food chain of people who are in hierarchy. The higher you are in position, the more likely you are to be towards the end of the investigation, not the beginning. And there's nothing surprising about the fact that he was required to do this, because that executive privilege claim was silly and ridiculous.
So, Cynthia, talking about moving up the chain here, you've got Trump's lawyer, Evan Corcoran, appearing in court today under an order from a judge, right? And after that judge said he had to answer questions about Trump under the crime fraud exception. Help us kind of understand the context here and how it relates to the classified documents case.
I have to tell you, I think this is maybe the biggest development of the week, although it's kind of the executive privilege one is a close second. And that is the federal judge and the appellate court said that in the conversations with Trump that are sacrosanct, usually between a lawyer and his client, we have evidence, the prima facie evidence, that a crime was committed. And it's not by Evan Corcoran. He's testifying in the grand jury. So who does that leave? And the court has found that. It's shocking. And he was in testifying for several hours today. If he had taken the Fifth Amendment in there, which might suggest he had some criminal exposure, it wouldn't have taken 3 hours. So he went in and testified about what we believe to be the evidence about what search was conducted, because he had conversations with the DOJ about what had been searched and how it was searched and how the reporting was done and how the letter that came through Christina Bobb was written. And he can testify to that. And the court has said a crime was there. So what does that tell us? That tells us they're looking at obstruction by Trump. And that is a huge deal. In all the time I prosecuted cases at DOJ, in all the time I prosecuted cases at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., and I was a low-level prosecutor in Brooklyn, I don't remember them piercing the attorney-client privilege. I mean, it just isn't done. And the fact that you would do it with an ex-president of the United States is so huge. It's such a bombshell that we cannot communicate to you enough about how serious that means this court thinks that Trump's exposure is on obstruction.
Maya, I got about a minute left. I want to get a summation from you on this. I gave sort of a litany of the cases that are pending, and it seems that they're all kind of hitting at the same time. Does it matter which one really drops first? Does it change the efforts by other prosecutors if the New York DA and the grand jury levels their charges and there's an indictment coming down? How does that interaction work?
Well, generally speaking, it's more about whether witnesses are available, and in this case, the witness would be Donald Trump as the person indicted. But they work it out. I mean, there's literally conversations that happen between offices and work it out. But I will say this. I am going to be the person who says it doesn't matter. Okay. Only because indictment is indictment is indictment.
Indictment is indictment is indictment. Maya Wiley and Cynthia Alksne, thank you both. Well, that's all in for this week.
MSNBC presents a new Peacock original documentary.
Lowndes County was one of the poorest counties in the country. It was 80% African American, and in 1965, no black people registered to vote.
The story of a brave community.
People were followed, people could lose their jobs.
That found its voice by voting.
We have to continue to tell the story of how we got to where we are today.
Lowndes County and the Road to Black Power. Tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC and streaming now on Peacock.